The dark sky poured a relentless rain over the city, as if even the heavens were crying for the fate of Piper and her little brother Jasper. Since losing their parents, the streets had become their only home, a cruel and indifferent place for two children alone in the world. Piper, with her dark hair stuck to her face by the rain, carried Jasper in her thin arms, feeling the abnormal heat emanating from her brother's fragile body. Her large brown eyes were red from crying, but she couldn't give up. She was the only person Jasper had in the world. "Hold on just a little longer, Jasper," she whispered against her brother's wet hair, feeling his chest rise and fall with difficulty with each breath. "I promise, I'll get help." The rain fell harder and harder, making Piper seek shelter under the awning of a closed shop. Her clothes, a faded dress torn at the edges, were soaked and heavy. Jasper coughed violently in her arms, a sound that tore at his sister's heart. Each cough seemed to tear away a piece of the boy's life force. His round face, normally cheerful and smiling, was now pale and downcast, with lips almost blue from cold. The fever that had been consuming him for days now seemed to boil his little body, and Piper didn't know what else to do. People passed quickly on the sidewalk, some with umbrellas, others protecting themselves as best they could from the storm. But none even glanced at the two abandoned children. "Please, sir. Mom." "Someone." Piper tried to get the attention of passers-by, her voice almost disappearing in the noise of the rain. "My brother is sick. We need help." Desperation grew inside Piper like a dark wave. For days Jasper had been getting worse, his cough becoming deeper, his fever higher, and now he could barely keep his eyes open. She had tried everything: wet cloths on his forehead to bring down the fever, teas made with herbs she could find, even lullabies her mother used to sing. Nothing worked. With each passing hour, Jasper grew weaker, more distant. Piper looked around, tears mixing with the rain streaming down her face. The city lights shone in the distance, cruel in their indifference, while Jasper trembled violently in her arms, his small body fighting against the disease consuming him. "I won't let you go," promised Piper, pressing Jasper against her chest, as if she could transfer her own strength to him. "You're all I have in this world." It was then that Piper saw through the curtain of rain a long gleaming car stopping in front of an illuminated restaurant across the street. The restaurant light seemed warm and welcoming, a cruel contrast to the cold darkness where she and Jasper found themselves. From the car emerged a tall man, dressed in elegant clothes and protected by an umbrella, held by another man in a dark suit. Something in the first man's posture, in the way people around seemed to notice him, told Piper he was important, that he had power, that he could be the answer to her prayers. With Jasper firmly in her arms, she gathered the last of her strength and ran across the street, ignoring the cars that honked and braked sharply. "It's our last hope," thought Piper, feeling Jasper's weight increase with each step. "It has to work." The man was Sterling, known in the city for his business empire and calculating coldness. His angular, well-shaven face showed no emotion as he prepared to enter the restaurant, where a business dinner awaited him. For him, that night was just another in his routine of accumulating power and wealth, indifferent to the storm punishing the less fortunate. Piper managed to reach him before he entered, her little legs trembling with exhaustion, her heart beating erratically in her chest. She stopped before him, a small, drenched figure carrying a precious burden that seemed too large for her fragile arms. "Sir, please." Her voice was trembling but determined. "You look like an important person. Can you help us?" Sterling looked down and saw the soaked girl, hair stuck to her face, eyes pleading, and the small body of the boy in her arms, notably motionless except for occasional tremors and difficult breathing. For a moment, just a brief instant, something seemed to change in his eyes. A distant memory, perhaps, a momentary human connection. Whatever it was, it quickly disappeared, replaced by impatience and irritation. He had an important dinner, important people to impress, profitable business to close. He had no time to get involved with the problems of two street children. His bodyguard stepped forward, as if to push Piper away, but she stood firm, determination shining in her feverish eyes. "Sir, by my brother? He's going to die." The words came out of her mouth in an act of pure desperation. "I'll wash your house, tend to your garden, do anything. I just need money for his medicine." Piper's words hung in the air between them, laden with a desperation that Sterling chose to ignore. He looked at her not as a child desperately in need of help, but as an annoyance, an unwanted stain on his perfect evening. His cold eyes scanned Piper's small, wet figure and Jasper's almost lifeless body in her arms. For a moment, she thought she saw something, compassion perhaps, cross his face, but it was quickly replaced by a mask of disdain. Sterling adjusted the cuff of his expensive shirt and looked at his gold watch, as if the time spent looking at the children was already too much of a waste. The rain continued to fall mercilessly, soaking Piper and Jasper even more, while Sterling remained protected under the umbrella held by his bodyguard. "Get out of my way," he finally said, with a voice as cold as the falling rain. "There are institutions for people like you. Don't bother me." Piper's heart sank at hearing the cruel words. Every day on the streets she had faced rejection and indifference, but something in Sterling's calculated coldness wounded her deeply. How could someone look at a dying child and simply not care? She stepped forward, determined to try once more, but Sterling's bodyguard moved with surprising quickness. The bodyguard made a move to push her away, and Piper lost her balance on the wet sidewalk, desperately trying to protect Jasper as she fell. Time seemed to slow down as she fell backward, feeling Jasper's weight slip from her arms. The impact with the ground was painful, but nothing compared to the pain of seeing her brother falling into a large puddle of dirty water at the edge of the street, his small body producing a splash that made the water soil his already wet clothes even more. "Jasper!" Piper screamed, her voice tearing through the night air. "No, please, no!" Time froze in that terrible moment. Piper, fallen on the wet ground, saw Sterling turn his back on her without even a glance to check if the children were okay. He entered the restaurant with firm steps, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just ignored a child's desperate plea to save her brother's life. The bodyguard followed him, closing the umbrella and letting the raindrops fall on the red carpet at the restaurant entrance. The elegant doors closed behind them, isolating Sterling's comfortable and luxurious world from the desperation he had left behind. Piper dragged herself across the wet sidewalk, ignoring the pain in her scraped knees and elbows from the fall. All that mattered was reaching Jasper, who lay motionless in the puddle of water, his skin now paler than ever against the darkness of the rainy night. "Jasper, please wake up," Piper begged, finally reaching her brother and pulling him out of the water. "Jasper, don't leave me alone in this world. Please, talk to me." With trembling hands, Piper lifted Jasper's body, feeling his dead weight in her arms. Her heart was beating so hard it seemed to want to escape from her chest. Jasper's face was completely pale. His lips had a frightening bluish coloration. She shook him gently, then more forcefully calling his name between desperate sobs. The rain continued to fall relentlessly upon the two, as if the universe was indifferent to the drama unfolding on that dark sidewalk. Piper pressed her ear against her brother's chest, trying to hear his heartbeat through the noise of the storm. For a terrible moment, she couldn't hear anything, and an anguished cry escaped her throat. Then, almost imperceptible, a weak movement of Jasper's chest, a breath so shallow it was barely noticeable. "He's alive." "He's still alive," she murmured, tears of relief mixing with those of the rain. But for how much longer? The question hung in the air unanswered, as Piper looked desperately around, seeking help, some sign of hope. Through the restaurant windows, she could see Sterling sitting comfortably, laughing and talking with other well-dressed people, completely oblivious to the drama happening outside. The contrast was too painful to bear. Inside, warmth, food, comfort, indifference. Outside, cold, hunger, despair, brotherly love. With a determination born of the purest desperation, Piper lifted Jasper once again in her arms. He was heavier now, his consciousness completely absent, his body surrendered to the disease that was consuming him. But Piper couldn't give up, would not give up. With Jasper in her arms, she began to walk down the street, her legs faltering with each step, the rain punishing their fragile bodies. Where she was going, she wasn't exactly sure. She only knew she needed to find help before it was too late. "I'll save you, Jasper," she promised, her words almost inaudible under the storm. "Even if it's the last thing I do in this life." The city lights shone in the distance, distorted by the curtain of rain, as Piper stumbled down the street with Jasper in her arms. Her small body faced the immense effort of carrying her brother, but her will was much greater than her physical strength. Each step was a battle against exhaustion, against the despair that threatened to consume her. Jasper now responded to no stimulus. His body was completely inert, as if he had already given up fighting. But Piper refused to accept this possibility. In her mind flashed memories of better days. Jasper laughing as he ran through the park, his eyes shining when they got a piece of fresh bread, the way he always smiled even in the most difficult moments. These fragments of happiness amid misery were what gave Piper strength to continue, to face one more step, one more second in that desperate fight for her brother's life. "Remember when Mom used to sing us to sleep?" she whispered to Jasper, as if he could hear her. "I'll sing to you when we're safe, I promise. Just don't go away, please." Jasper's silence was the most terrifying response Piper could receive. He always responded, always had a kind word or a smile for her. Now only silence and a breath so weak it seemed almost non-existent. A few meters ahead, Piper spotted the lights of a public hospital, a beacon of hope in the storm that was her life. With the last strength she could gather, she quickened her pace, ignoring the pain in her muscles, the exhaustion that took over every inch of her body. The hospital entrance seemed to be miles away, though in reality it was only a few meters. Each step was a battle, each breath a struggle. When she finally reached the glass doors of the emergency room, her legs gave way, and she fell to her knees on the cold floor, still holding Jasper with all the strength she had left. "Help, please," she shouted with what remained of her voice. "My brother. He's not breathing. Please, someone help." The fluorescent lights of the hospital illuminated the faces of the two children like a cruel spotlight, revealing the full extent of the despair in which they found themselves. Piper's face was contorted with pain and worry, her eyes begging for help from anyone who looked in her direction. Jasper, in contrast, seemed strangely at peace, his face motionless, expressionless, as if he were already far away. A security guard approached, initially with a stern expression, ready to expel two more beggars seeking shelter from the rain. But something in Piper's gaze, in Jasper's frightening immobility, made him hesitate. A nurse passed by hurriedly, but stopped immediately upon seeing the children. Piper felt gentle hands trying to take Jasper from her arms, but she instinctively resisted, clinging to her brother as if her own life depended on it. "He's all I have," she murmured between sobs, reluctant to release Jasper even to those who could help him. "Please save him. He's just a child. He deserves to live." The waiting room of the public hospital buzzed with activity, even at that hour of the night. People moaned in worn plastic chairs, some coughing, others holding injured limbs, all with expressions of pain and anxiety. The air carried a strong smell of disinfectant, mixed with the unmistakable odor of disease and despair. Piper remained kneeling at the entrance, soaked by the rain that still dripped from her clothes and hair, forming a small puddle on the linoleum floor. Jasper remained motionless in her arms, his chest rising and falling at increasingly long and worrying intervals. A security guard in a dark blue uniform approached quickly, his face hardened by the routine of dealing with difficult situations night after night. "Girl, you can't stay here. Where are your parents?" "Unaccompanied children cannot enter without a responsible adult," he said in a firm voice, but not completely devoid of compassion. "This is not a place for street children looking for shelter from the rain." Piper raised her face marked by tears, her eyes conveying a desperation that words could not express. She hugged Jasper tighter, as if fearing someone might tear him from her arms, the only family she had left in the world. The hospital's fluorescent lights seemed merciless, revealing Jasper's extreme pallor and his lips that were already turning purple. Every passing second was precious. Every moment of hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. Piper took a deep breath, gathering strength she didn't know she still possessed. "Please, sir, my brother is very sick. He's dying," Piper begged, her voice choked with tears and exhaustion. "I have no one else in the world besides him. If you send us away, he'll die out there alone in the rain. Please have mercy." The security guard hesitated, his gaze alternating between the rules he should follow and the obvious emergency before him. His expression softened a bit upon seeing the boy's critical condition, but years of work had taught him to follow protocols. He opened his mouth to respond when a middle-aged nurse hurriedly passed through the corridor. She stopped abruptly upon seeing the scene, a soaked girl holding an almost unconscious boy, begging for help while the security guard seemed about to send them away. The nurse approached quickly, her experienced eyes assessing the situation in seconds. She knelt beside Piper, ignoring the water soaking her white uniform, and touched Jasper's forehead, withdrawing her hand almost immediately, alarmed by the intense heat emanating from the small body. "This boy needs urgent care," she declared, already signaling to other staff members. "The fever is extremely high and his breathing is compromised. We need to take him to emergency right now." Everything happened very quickly after that. Jasper was placed on a stretcher by gentle but efficient hands, while Piper tried to keep up, her legs stumbling with fatigue. The medical team moved urgently through the corridors, the stretcher sliding rapidly across the floor, while medical terms that Piper didn't understand were exchanged over her brother's motionless body. For a terrible moment, she feared they would separate them, that they would leave her behind while taking Jasper away, but the nurse who had interceded held her hand, allowing her to accompany her brother. A room with equipment was quickly reached, and Jasper was transferred to a bed, surrounded by beeping machines and doctors speaking rapidly. Piper was kept at the door, watching with eyes widened by fear as they connected tubes and wires to her brother's small body. She had never felt so helpless in her entire life. Are they hurting him? Why are they putting all those things on him? Piper asked the nurse, her hands squeezing the wet fabric of her dress. He looks so small amid all those machines. He'll be all right, won't he? After what seemed like an eternity, but was only a few minutes of intense medical activity, a grey-haired doctor with a compassionate look approached Piper. Her badge identified her as Dr. Sinclair. She bent down to be at Piper's eye level, a kindness the girl rarely experienced from adults. The doctor had wrinkles around her eyes that spoke of years of service, of lives saved and lost, of battles against time and disease. Her hands, when they held Piper's, were firm and warm. "Your brother is very sick, little one," said Dr. Sinclair, her voice gentle but not hiding the gravity of the situation. "He has severe pneumonia, a serious infection in his lungs. We're doing everything we can, but he needs a specific medication that unfortunately we don't have available here. Without this medication in the next few hours, I don't know if he'll be able to resist. The infection is very aggressive, and his body is already weakened by exposure and malnutrition." The words hit Piper like physical blows, each one more painful than the last. Pneumonia, specific medication, not available. Don't know if he'll resist. The room seemed to spin around her, the lights becoming brighter and then darker, as she struggled to process what she was hearing. Her childish mind, already overwhelmed by months of surviving on the streets and the premature responsibility of caring for her brother, desperately tried to find a solution, a way out of this nightmare. Dr. Sinclair continued talking, explaining about antibiotics, resistance, hospital pharmacies, but all Piper could understand was that her brother would die if she couldn't get that medication. "How much does this medicine cost, doctor?" "I can work to get the money," offered Piper, determination shining through her fatigue. "I can clean the entire hospital. I can take care of other patients. I can do anything. Just tell me how much I need to get to save my brother." The doctor hesitated, clearly moved by the courage of the little girl before her. She explained that the medication cost more than Piper could earn in months of work, even if it were legal to employ a child her age. She informed her that they would try to contact other health facilities to check the availability of the medicine, but they couldn't promise anything. Meanwhile, they would do their best with the available resources. Piper was led back to the waiting room after the nurse helped her dry off a bit with paper towels and offered her hot tea to warm her trembling body. Now alone amidst the crowd of sick and injured people, Piper felt the weight of the world on her small shoulders. The tea cooled untouched between her hands, while her mind worked frantically, seeking an impossible solution. "I won't let you die, Jasper," she muttered to herself like a solemn promise. "I'll find a way to get this medicine, even if I have to cross the entire city under this storm. I promised our parents I would take care of you, and that's what I'll do until my last breath." While Piper sank into desperate thoughts, a sudden movement caught her attention. An elderly lady, with white hair tied in a simple bun and modest but clean clothes, was getting up from a nearby chair, leaning on a wooden cane. As she tried to grab her purse, the lady lost her balance for a moment and the purse fell, spilling its contents on the floor. Instinctively, even amid her own despair, Piper stood up to help. Years living on the streets had not hardened her heart or erased the lessons of kindness her parents had taught her. She knelt down and began collecting the lady's belongings: an embroidered handkerchief, a small prayer book, some medicines, and a leather wallet worn with use. "Let me help you, ma'am," Piper offered, gathering the objects carefully. "You shouldn't bend down like that with your cane. You could fall and hurt yourself." The wallet had opened when it fell, and Piper saw several bills inside, more money than she had seen together in a long time. For an instant, just a fleeting moment, a terrible thought crossed her mind. That money could buy Jasper's medicine. Nobody would need to know. It would be so easy to slip a few bills into the pocket of her damp dress. The idea made her pause for a second, her heart racing with the possibility of saving her brother, even if it meant doing something her parents would have disapproved of. But as quickly as it came, the thought was rejected. Piper closed the wallet without touching the money and handed it to the lady along with the other belongings, ignoring the desperate voice inside her that screamed, this might be Jasper's only chance. "Thank you very much, dear." The lady thanked her, surprised by the unexpected kindness. Nowadays it's rare to find people willing to help, especially someone so young and clearly going through difficulties of her own. "You're all wet and look exhausted. What is a girl like you doing alone in the hospital at this hour of the night?" Something in the lady's gentle voice made Piper's defenses crumble. Perhaps it was the maternal tone that reminded her of her own mother. Perhaps it was simply the accumulation of hours of fear and despair, but Piper found herself telling the whole story: how she and Jasper had lost their parents, how they lived on the streets, how her brother had gradually fallen ill until reaching the critical state he was in now, how desperately she needed a medication she couldn't afford. The words came out in an emotional torrent, interrupted by occasional sobs that she tried to control. The lady listened in silence, her expression changing from surprise to deep compassion as Piper spoke. When the girl finally finished, the elderly woman had tears in her eyes. "You could have taken money from my wallet when it fell," the lady observed softly, with no accusation in her voice. "I saw how you looked at the money and hesitated. Many would have taken advantage of the opportunity, especially with such an urgent reason as saving a brother's life. But you chose to be honest, even in your moment of greatest need. That says a lot about your character, little one." Before Piper could respond, the lady opened her purse again and took out something that shone under the hospital lights: a small golden brooch with intricate details and a red stone in the center. It was clearly an old and valuable piece, the kind of object that would pass from generation to generation in a family. The lady held it for a moment, as if saying goodbye to an old friend, before extending it to Piper. "This brooch belonged to my grandmother, and before her to her mother's mother," explained the lady, placing the precious object in Piper's small, dirty hand. "It is the most valuable item I own, not just in money, but in memories. But memories don't save lives, and your brother needs it more than I do now. There's a pawn shop 2 blocks from here near the pharmacy on the corner. They should still be open, despite the hour. Sell this and buy the medicine for your brother. It's all I can do for you." Piper looked at the brooch in her hand, unable to believe the incomprehensible generosity of this stranger. The jewel captured the light and reflected it in small rainbows, as if it contained hope in its very structure. It was heavy, substantial, clearly valuable. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were not of despair, but of gratitude so deep that it seemed to overflow from her small body. She tried to return the brooch, arguing that it was too precious, that she couldn't accept something so valuable from a stranger, but the lady gently closed Piper's fingers around the jewel. "A life is worth more than any material object, dear," the lady said firmly. "I've had a long life full of memories to cherish. Your brother deserves the chance to create his own. Go now, quickly, before the shop closes. And when your brother is better, remember to always extend your kindness to others, as you did to me today." With her heart overflowing with renewed hope, Piper thanked the lady with words broken by emotion and ran to the hospital exit. The rain had diminished somewhat, transforming into a persistent drizzle that still wet the streets and sidewalks. But Piper hardly noticed the moisture now. All her attention was focused on the mission of saving her brother. The brooch was safe in her closed hand, practically hidden to avoid drawing attention. The streets were almost deserted at that hour, just a few occasional cars passing quickly, their headlights creating ghostly glimmers in the puddles of water. Piper ran as fast as her tired legs allowed, mentally counting the steps to the pawn shop the lady had mentioned. "Just hold on a little longer, Jasper," she whispered as she ran, as if her brother could hear her across the distance. "I'm coming back with your medicine. We'll stay together as we promised. Just a little more fight, my brave little brother." Adrenaline propelled Piper forward, even when her muscles protested in pain. She could already see the pawn shop sign a block away, a yellowish neon light that blinked intermittently in the rainy night. So focused was she on her goal that she didn't notice the two figures that emerged from a dark alley and began following her. Only when she was a few meters from the store did Piper notice the quick footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw two teenagers approaching, their predatory expressions visible even in the semi-darkness of the poorly lit street. One of them, the taller one, had a cut on his eyebrow and a malicious smile that made Piper freeze in fear. The other was smaller, but his eyes had a calculating coldness that she immediately recognized. They were eyes that had seen too much, too young, eyes that belonged to someone who had learned to survive at the expense of others. "Hey, kid, what do you have there in your hand that you're holding so carefully?" asked the taller one, moving even closer. "We saw you leaving the hospital as if you'd won the lottery. Must be something valuable, right? Why not share with your friends from the street?" Fear took hold of Piper, a fear different from what she had felt for Jasper. This was a primordial, instinctive fear, the kind of fear that makes your heart race and your mouth dry. She knew boys like these, knew the harsh rules of life on the streets. They were older and bigger, and Piper knew the dangers she faced alone on the streets at night. But the thought of Jasper, lying in that hospital bed, fighting for each breath, gave Piper a courage she didn't know she possessed. She gripped the brooch more tightly in her hand and took a step back, her eyes frantically searching for an escape route. "I have nothing for you," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. "Please, let me pass. My brother is very sick. I need to get to the store before it closes. It's an emergency." Her words fell on deaf ears. The boys exchanged a quick glance and advanced simultaneously, one blocking Piper's path to the pawn shop, the other positioning himself behind her, cutting off her escape route. The message was clear. They wouldn't let her pass without taking whatever she was hiding. Piper felt despair growing again. So close. She was so close to saving Jasper, only to be stopped just meters away from the solution. The injustice of the situation ignited something inside her, a fierce determination that surpassed even her fear. "It's to save my brother's life," she shouted, her voice echoing in the empty street. "He will die if I don't get the medicine. Please show some compassion. You must have loved someone too." For a moment it seemed her words had touched something in the teenagers. The smaller one hesitated, his gaze faltering briefly. But the taller one just laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that cut through the humid air like a knife. "I don't care about your brother, Pipsqueak," he replied, advancing another step. "It's every man for himself in this world. Now be a good girl and hand over what you've got in your hand, or we'll have to take it by force." Piper realized there was no diplomatic solution. They wouldn't be moved, wouldn't back down. In an impulsive decision born of pure desperation, she pretended to try to pass by the smaller boy, only to change direction at the last moment and run with all her speed toward the street. It was a risky maneuver, but the surprise worked for a crucial instant. Piper ran as she had never run before, her feet barely touching the wet ground, the brooch clutched in her hand as if it were Jasper's heart itself. She could hear the heavy footsteps of the teenagers behind her, their curses echoing in the night. She was almost reaching the other side of the street when she felt fingers grab her dress, pulling her back. "You're not going anywhere with our merchandise," growled the larger boy, pulling Piper forcefully. In a desperate struggle, Piper tried to break free, kicking and twisting with a strength born of pure survival instinct, not for herself, but for Jasper. Her fingers closed even more tightly around the brooch, her nails digging into her own palm. The fight lasted only seconds, but it seemed an eternity. In a final movement to free herself, Piper managed to tear her dress from the aggressor's hands, but the momentum made her stumble and fall forward directly onto the wet street. That's when she heard the sound, the roar of an engine approaching rapidly, followed by the sharp screech of tires trying to brake on wet asphalt. Piper turned toward the sound, only to be blinded by the bright lights of headlights rapidly approaching. "Jasper, forgive me," was her only thought as the car came toward her, seemingly unable to stop in time. "I tried, little brother." I swear I tried until the end. The surgical center of the hospital was an almost sacred space where life and death waged their most intense battles. The white, merciless lights revealed every detail of Piper's small, fragile body, now unconscious on the operating table. The medical team moved with urgent precision around her, their tense expressions reflecting the gravity of the situation. The impact of the accident had been serious. Piper suffered severe injuries and was unconscious. The medical team worked intensely to stabilize her, forming a painful contrast with the extreme pallor of her skin. Monitors beeped around her, measuring each weak beat of her heart, each breath assisted by life support equipment. Outside the room, through the observation window, an elegantly dressed man watched the scene with eyes wide with horror. Sterling, still wearing the same expensive suit from the business dinner, now stained with Piper's blood. How could I do this? How could I ignore a child begging for help and now be responsible for almost killing her? He muttered to himself, hands pressed against the glass as if wanting to pass through it. What kind of monster have I become? The chief surgeon worked feverishly to contain the bleeding in Piper's brain, his precise movements contrasting with the urgency of the situation. Every second was precious. Every moment of hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. The heart monitor recorded increasingly weak beats, an alarming sign that the girl's small body was losing the battle. A nurse new to the team noticed something strange. Even unconscious under the effect of powerful sedatives, Piper kept her right hand firmly closed, her pale fingers contracted as if in a last desperate attempt to hold on to something important. The nurse gently tried to open the girl's fingers, thinking she might be holding something that needed to be removed before the operation could continue, but found surprising resistance. It was as if, even on the brink of death, Piper refused to let go of the object she was holding. "She won't let go, doctor," the nurse reported, concerned. "Her fingers are so tightly closed that I fear hurting her if I force them." I've never seen anything like this before, especially in someone so young and in such serious condition. Outside the operating room, Sterling paced back and forth, a figure tormented by the weight of guilt. His driver, a middle-aged man who had served him for years, remained a few steps behind, equally shaken by the accident. Everything had happened so quickly. The girl suddenly appearing in front of the car, the desperate attempt to brake, the horrible sound of impact. But what truly tormented Sterling wasn't just the accident itself, but the recognition. The moment he saw the small body on the wet asphalt, he recognized her immediately. The same girl who had begged for his help hours before, the same child he had dismissed with disdain, as if she were merely an inconvenience in his perfect day. The universe, in its cruel irony, had placed her life in his hands not once but twice in the same day, and both times he had failed terribly. Seeing that the girl was still breathing after the impact, Sterling had immediately ordered his driver to take them to the best hospital in the city, not the public hospital where accident victims would normally be sent, but the private clinic where the elite of society received exclusive care. "We have to do more than just save her," Sterling told his driver, his voice choked with an emotion he rarely displayed. "I have to fix what I did. And I'm not just talking about the accident, but what happened before when I could have helped and chose to do nothing." While doctors fought to keep Piper alive in another room in another hospital, the public hospital that Piper had left to seek medication for her brother, Jasper was fighting his own battle against death. His small body, already weakened by days of fever and poor nutrition, was losing the ability to combat the infection consuming his lungs. Dr. Sinclair observed the monitors with growing concern, noting how the oxygen saturation gradually decreased, how the fever refused to yield even with the available medications. It was a battle she had seen many times in her career, poor children arriving too late for treatment, without resources for essential medications, without families able to help. Usually these stories ended in the same tragic way, but something about Jasper and his dedicated sister had deeply touched the experienced doctor. She had done everything to obtain the necessary medication, contacting other health units, begging the hospital administration, but without success. Now all that remained was to wait and hope that Jasper's young body would find strength where there seemed to be none. "Where is your sister, little one?" whispered the doctor, adjusting the oxygen feeding into Jasper's nostrils. "She promised to come back to you, and I've never seen such determination in someone so young. Hold on a little longer." Back at the elite hospital, an administrative nurse approached Sterling with a clipboard in hand, her face a mask of professionalism that barely hid the curiosity about why one of the richest and most powerful men in the city was so devastated by an accident with a street girl. She needed information for the hospital record, but all they knew was that the patient's name was Piper. No surname, no documents, no formal registration in the system. Sterling looked at the clipboard almost in a trance, as if the questions there were written in a language he could no longer understand. How could he fill in the gaps of a child's life that he didn't know, that he had ignored when she needed him most? It was then that the nurse, perhaps moved by compassion or perhaps just following protocol, mentioned something that changed everything. The object that the girl was holding so tightly. "We've identified what she's holding so firmly," the nurse informed. "It's an antique brooch, apparently valuable. The doctor believes it may have sentimental value, since she won't release it even while unconscious. Perhaps it belongs to her family." The mention of the brooch sparked Sterling's curiosity. Why would a street child be clutching a valuable object with such determination, especially when she was literally running for her life? He asked to see the object, but was informed that this would be impossible without hurting the patient. Determined to better understand the situation, Sterling began questioning the medical team, the paramedics who had first arrived at the scene, anyone who might have information about Piper. It was then that one of the doctors casually mentioned that before losing consciousness completely during transport, Piper had repeatedly mumbled about her brother, about a medicine, about how she needed to reach the pawn shop before it closed. The pieces started to fall into place in Sterling's mind. The desperate plea earlier that day, the mention of a sick brother needing medication, the valuable brooch, the frantic run through the rainy street. "My God!" exclaimed Sterling, the realization hitting him like a punch to the stomach. She was trying to sell the brooch to buy medicine for her brother. She was running to save his life when my car hit her. The guilt already consuming Sterling intensified tenfold. It wasn't enough that he had ignored a desperate child's plea for help. Now he had been directly responsible for preventing her from saving her brother. 2 young, innocent lives were hanging by a thread because of his indifference, his selfishness, his lack of basic humanity. With a determination born of guilt and remorse, Sterling grabbed his phone and began making calls, using all his power and influence to locate Piper's brother. It didn't take long. The world of the privileged has its advantages, and he soon discovered that a boy named Jasper had been admitted to the public hospital with severe pneumonia, urgently needing a specific and expensive medication that wasn't available at that facility. The boy was rapidly deteriorating, with increasingly slim chances of survival without proper treatment. "Send the best pediatric pneumonia specialist immediately to the public hospital," Sterling ordered his assistant over the phone. "Buy all available stock of that medication regardless of price, and prepare to transfer the boy here as soon as he's stable enough to be moved. These children will not die today, not because of me. Spare no expense, understood? No cost is too high." Inside the operating room, the battle for Piper's life reached its most critical moment. The trauma to her brain had caused dangerous swelling, increasing intracranial pressure to alarming levels. The doctors had done everything within their power, drained the accumulated blood, administered medications to reduce swelling, stabilized secondary fractures. Now it was a matter of waiting and watching, of hoping the young body would respond to treatment. But the signs weren't promising. The heart monitor showed increasingly weak and irregular beats. Blood pressure was gradually falling, oxygenation decreasing despite maximum support. The medical team exchanged worried glances, mentally preparing for the worst. Even in the best hospitals, With the best doctors and equipment, there are limits to what medicine can do. Sometimes the damage is simply too great, life too fragile. "We are losing her," announced the chief surgeon, his voice calm but tense beneath the surgical mask. "Prepare resuscitation protocol. I want a unit of blood ready and epinephrine available immediately." Outside the room, Sterling watched with growing horror, witnessing Piper's life literally slipping away before his eyes. The nurses moved more quickly now, bringing additional equipment into the room, preparing for the moment when the girl's heart would completely stop. That's when he noticed something strange. Amid all the tension and movement, Piper's closed hand began to relax slightly, as if she was finally ready to release the brooch she had protected with such determination. It was as if, even unconscious, she somehow knew that her mission had been transferred to other hands, that her brother was no longer alone in the fight for survival. This small gesture, this silent surrender, hit Sterling in a way that no words could. Tears flowed freely down his face, something that hadn't happened since his distant childhood. "Don't give up, Piper," he murmured, his words directed at the girl who couldn't hear him. "Your brother needs you, and I need the chance to fix what I've done. Please, fight a little longer." Meanwhile, at the public hospital, Jasper's situation took a sudden and dramatic turn. The team of specialists sent by Sterling had arrived with impressive speed, bringing not only the necessary medication, but also advanced equipment and expertise that were rarely available in that public facility. Dr. Sinclair watched with a mixture of surprise and relief as the new treatment was administered. As more modern monitors were installed, as her small patient finally received the care he deserved from the beginning. But her mind was divided between relief for Jasper's chance and concern for Piper, who had not returned as promised. Where was the girl who had demonstrated such courage and determination? Had she gotten the money for the medicine? Had she encountered difficulties in the dangerous streets at night? The doctor had no answers, only a disturbing feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. "Who sent you? Who is paying for all this?" Dr. Sinclair asked the specialist doctor who led the new team. "I've been working at this hospital for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this, especially for a child without resources or influential family." In the operating room, Piper's condition worsened. The monitors indicated that her heart had stopped beating, and the medical team immediately initiated emergency procedures. The medical team acted quickly, starting all the necessary procedures to try to revive Piper. Each professional knew exactly what to do in that critical situation. It was a choreographed dance of precise movements, each team member knowing exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it. Sterling watched through the window, his eyes fixed on the monitor that showed the flat line, the absence of life where before there had been at least a weak pulse. Seconds turned into minutes, minutes into an eternity of suspense and despair. Time was running against Piper. After 4 minutes without oxygenation, the brain begins to suffer irreversible damage. After 10 minutes, the chances of recovery are practically nil. "Continue compressions," ordered the chief surgeon, his forehead now covered with sweat despite the refrigerated environment. "This patient is young and previously healthy. Let's give her every possible chance." The medical team worked tirelessly, taking turns with chest compressions to maintain constant strength and rhythm. Medication after medication was administered. Increasingly aggressive techniques were attempted, but the monitor continued to show that devastating straight line. After 15 minutes of intense efforts, the chief surgeon looked at the clock, then at the monitor, and finally at his exhausted team. There were rules, protocols, medical realities that could not be ignored. There came a moment when persisting was no longer responsible medicine, but rather the refusal to accept the inevitable. With a deep and painful sigh, he lowered his hands, signaling for the team to stop compressions. "Time of death," he began, his voice heavy with the defeat that never became easier, no matter how many times it was experienced. That's when it happened. So subtle at first that no one noticed, then unmistakable. A small spike appeared on the cardiac monitor, followed by another and another. Weak, irregular, but definitely present. The flat line had been replaced by a series of undulations indicating a heart struggling to return to life. The team looked in silence for a moment, almost afraid to believe before going into renewed action, now with the goal of stabilizing and strengthening this fragile return. Outside, Sterling fell to his knees, his normally impeccable posture completely forgotten, as he whispered words of gratitude to a God he hadn't believed in for years. It was a medical miracle, or perhaps something deeper, the physical manifestation of the same fierce determination that had kept Piper fighting for her brother against all obstacles. "She's coming back," exclaimed a nurse, her voice breaking the tense silence of the room. "We have heart rhythm, weak but present, pressure slowly rising. This girl is a fighter." While the team worked to stabilize Piper, Sterling received news from the public hospital. The medication was taking effect, and Jasper was showing the first signs of improvement. His oxygen saturation was rising, the fever finally beginning to subside, his lungs responding to the aggressive treatment. It was too early to declare victory, the doctors warned. The boy was still very sick, still facing a long road to complete recovery. But for the first time since he had been admitted, there was real, tangible hope. The scale that had previously tipped heavily toward death now began to slowly tilt in the direction of life. Sterling felt a relief so profound it nearly choked him. One of the two young people for whom he was responsible seemed to be emerging from immediate danger. Now everything depended on Piper continuing her own fight, on her traumatized brain having been spared permanent damage, on her indomitable spirit remaining intact through the physical trauma. "Mr. Sterling called a doctor, approaching with a grave expression. "We've managed to stabilize the girl for now, but I need to be honest. The situation is still extremely critical. The cranial trauma is severe, and we still don't know the extent of the brain damage. The next 24 hours will be decisive." The doctor continued explaining the situation in technical terms that Sterling barely understood, talking about intracranial pressure, diffuse axonal injury, cerebral contusions. But the businessman grasped the essentials. Piper had survived the impossible, had literally come back from death, but her battle was far from over. She would remain in a medically induced coma for the next few days, to give her brain the best chance of recovery. There were no guarantees. She could wake up perfectly fine, could have permanent sequelae, or might never wake up. It was a torturous wait that no money or power could shorten. For the first time in his adult life, Sterling faced a situation he could not control, manipulate, or buy a solution for. "I will do everything in my power to save these children," Sterling told the doctor, his voice finding renewed firmness. "Any specialist, any experimental treatment, any medical center in the world, regardless of cost. And meanwhile, I want to know more about them. How they ended up on the streets, what happened to their parents, how I can help them beyond immediate medical care." In the hours that followed, while Piper remained stabilized but critical, and Jasper slowly responded to treatment, Sterling used his contacts and resources to discover the children's story. What he learned only increased his feelings of guilt and responsibility. Piper and Jasper's parents had died in a fire a few months earlier, leaving the children completely alone in the world. Without relatives who could or would care for them, without resources to support themselves, they had ended up on the streets, surviving on small occasional jobs and the reluctant charity of strangers. Piper, at only 9 years old, had taken on the responsibility of caring for her younger brother, protecting him from the dangers of the street, seeking food and shelter, assuming a role that no child should ever need to assume. And when Jasper fell ill, she hadn't hesitated to do the unthinkable, offering herself in a form of servitude to save her brother. The courage and sacrifice of this child, contrasted with his own selfish indifference, hit Sterling like never before. "How could I have become this kind of person?" he asked aloud to the empty room where he awaited news. "When did I stop seeing others suffering? When did money and power become more important than basic humanity?" The night advanced slowly, the hours dragging while Piper and Jasper fought their parallel battles in separate rooms, in different hospitals. Sterling refused to go home, to leave the hospital even for a few hours to rest. He alternated between anxiously walking the corridors and sitting motionless for long periods, lost in dark and self-critical thoughts. The golden brooch they had finally managed to remove from Piper's unconscious hand now rested in his suit pocket, a tangible reminder of the sacrifice and determination of a child he had judged worthless. His phone rang constantly, Assistants, partners, lawyers, all wanting his attention for matters that once seemed urgent and now sounded trivial and empty. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, Sterling was truly facing the consequences of his choices, his way of living, his distorted values, and the self-assessment was devastating. "Save these children," he whispered like a prayer, looking through the hospital window at the city now sleeping under a sky finally clear after the storm. "Give me the chance to fix what I've done, and I swear I will never again pass by someone in need without stopping to help." A week had passed since the fateful night of the storm. The hospital corridors, once cold and impersonal, now seemed almost familiar to Sterling. For 7 days and nights he had remained there, refusing to leave while Piper fought for her life. His elegant suit had long been replaced by simpler clothes brought by his driver, his normally clean-shaven face now covered with stubble, his eyes marked by deep, dark circles that testified to sleepless nights. For those who knew him before, the transformation was shocking. Not just physical, but something deeper had changed in him, any change in the vital signs. Sterling asked the nurse leaving Piper's room, the same question he repeated almost every hour, every day. During that week, Sterling had mobilized resources that most people didn't even know existed. Specialists in brain trauma were brought from other countries, cutting-edge equipment was purchased and installed, experimental medications were imported with special authorizations. To Jasper, now transferred to the same hospital as his sister, the best pediatric pulmonologists monitored his recovery day and night. Money, which was once the center of Sterling's life, was now just a tool to try to repair the irreparable. While waiting and observing, Sterling had discovered more about the two children. How their parents had died in a fire, how they were left with no one to care for them, how they survived on the streets with only Piper's courage and Jasper's resilience. "Mr. Sterling, I think you should see this," called the chief doctor, hurrying out of Piper's room. "Her brain patterns are changing. She may be beginning to wake up." Sterling's heart raced as he entered the silent room where Piper was resting. After days in an induced coma, the doctors had finally reduced the sedation, allowing her brain to try to find its way back to consciousness. Her small body seemed even smaller in the hospital bed, surrounded by equipment and monitors. The external injuries were beginning to heal, but no one could say with certainty what they would find when, and if, she woke up. Brain damage was unpredictable, especially in cases as severe as hers. Sterling sat in the chair beside the bed, the same one where he had spent countless hours in recent days. He took Piper's small hand in his, noticing how delicate it was, how fragile it seemed, but also remembering the surprising strength with which she had held the brooch throughout the ordeal. This hand so small had carried her brother through the streets, had extended in supplication, had fought to save what she loved. "Piper," he called softly, "if you can hear me, I want you to know that Jasper is fine. You did it. You saved your brother." It was almost imperceptible at first, a slight tremor in her eyelids, a change in her breathing rhythm. Then, slowly, like someone emerging from the depths of a dark ocean, Piper's eyes began to open. Confused, unfocused at first, blinking against the room light that seemed too bright after days of darkness. Sterling held his breath, his heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode in his chest. The doctors had warned about possible sequelae, difficulty speaking, memory loss, personality changes, motor problems. Jasper was the first word that came from Piper's dry lips, almost inaudible, but clear as a bell to Sterling. "Where is my brother?" Sterling felt tears welling in his eyes. Of all possible first words, pain, confusion, fear, she chose to worry about her brother. Even after everything she had been through, her first thought was for Jasper. A strange and unfamiliar emotion filled Sterling's chest. Something he hadn't felt for so long he almost didn't recognize it. Pure admiration, not for wealth or power, but for something infinitely more valuable. Selfless and unwavering love. "Jasper is fine, Piper," he replied, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Thanks to you, he received the medication he needed. He's recovering quickly." Piper's eyes, still confused, focused on Sterling. A flash of recognition crossed her face, followed by something that looked like fear. She tried to move away, her weak body barely responding to commands. "You, from the restaurant," she mumbled, memory returning in fragments. "What happened?" Where am I? Sterling hesitated. How to explain everything? How to tell her about the accident, about how he almost killed her after denying help, about how his selfishness had nearly cost 2 innocent lives. The doctors had advised not to overwhelm her with traumatic information so early, to let her recover more before facing painful memories. But looking into Piper's frightened eyes, Sterling felt he owed her at least honesty. "There was an accident, Piper," he said gently. "You were hit by a car when you were running to sell the brooch. I was in the car. I brought you to this hospital, and I've been taking care of you and Jasper since then." "I'm sorry, more than I can express." Before Piper could process this information, the door to the room opened. Jasper ran in, his face lit up with a huge smile, his light steps showing no sign of the illness that had almost killed him. During the week of recovery, while Piper remained unconscious, Sterling had spent many hours with the boy, telling him stories, bringing him toys, ensuring he felt safe and loved while they waited for Piper to wake up. "Piper, you're awake!" shouted Jasper, running to the bed and climbing onto it with the agility of a completely recovered child. "I knew you'd come back. I knew it." Piper's weak arms embraced her brother, tears flowing freely down her face. The embrace lasted long minutes, as if the siblings needed to reassure themselves of each other's presence, confirm that it wasn't just a dream. Sterling observed the scene, feeling simultaneously part of it and an intruder. The man who had almost destroyed this sacred bond between siblings, but also the one who had helped preserve it. "Look, Piper," Jasper said excitedly, moving back a little. "Mr. Sterling gave me this. He showed a small toy airplane, and he said we're going to live in a big house with a garden. It's true, isn't it?" Piper looked confusedly at Sterling, who felt the weight of that gaze like a judgment. It was time for the truth to discover if redemption was possible for someone like him. "Piper," Sterling began, carefully choosing his words, "during these days, while taking care of you, I learned more than I have in my entire adult life. I was a cruel and indifferent man, so consumed by money and power that I forgot what really matters. I can never fully repair what I did, the pain I caused, but if you give me a chance, I want to offer you a home, education, and all the care you deserve." There was a prolonged silence. Jasper anxiously looked between his sister and Sterling, sensing the tension, but not completely understanding. Piper studied the man's face, looking for something, sincerity perhaps, or some sign that she could trust this surprising offer. "Why would you do this?" she finally asked, her voice small but firm. "Out of guilt?" "At first, yes," Sterling admitted, determined to be completely honest. "But now, it's something more. You reminded me what it is to be human, what it is to love unconditionally as you love Jasper, what it is to sacrifice for someone. I want to learn more of these lessons, and if you allow me, I want to give you the childhood you deserve." Piper looked at Jasper, who smiled hopefully. Then she turned her gaze back to Sterling. "You didn't buy my brother that day," she finally said, "but you saved our lives today." Slowly, she extended her small hand to hold Sterling's. "I think we all deserve a second chance." Months later, Sterling's large mansion echoed with a sound that had long been absent: children's laughter. In the spacious garden, Jasper ran chasing a ball, his energy seemingly inexhaustible, his body completely recovered from the illness that had almost killed him. In the elegant library, Piper sat at an antique desk, absorbed in her studies. Her recovery had been slower, more difficult. Some days still brought headaches, and occasionally her right hand trembled when she was tired. But her mind remained sharp, her determination intact, and she absorbed knowledge with a thirst that impressed even the most experienced tutors. Sterling observed the children from afar, through the window of his rarely used office. His business continued, of course, but no longer occupied the center of his existence. He had discovered a greater purpose, a more meaningful mission than accumulating wealth, using his resources to make a difference in the lives of vulnerable children like Piper and Jasper had been. On the wall behind his desk, a recent photograph showed Sterling, Piper, and Jasper cutting the inaugural ribbon of the Renewed Hope Foundation, created in honor of the children's parents. The foundation offered shelter, education, and medical care to street children, especially those without family. "Mr. Sterling?" Piper's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood at the office door, a book in her hands, her now healthy and shiny hair tied in a braid. "Yes, Piper?" "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." As she turned to return to her studies, Sterling felt a wave of gratitude. The little beggar who once pleaded for help had not only saved her brother but had also saved the soul of a man who had forgotten the value of compassion. And that, he realized, was a gift infinitely more valuable than any wealth he had ever possessed. If the story of Piper, Jasper, and Sterling moved you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're from. And don't go anywhere. The next story is already appearing on screen, made especially for you. See you soon.